What are the best video games of all time? Now, it's kind of a silly question, right? I mean, there's so many video games out there that are accomplishing so many different things. It's such a wide, rich array of games, and you could not possibly put them onto some sort of ranked quantitative list. That is just silly. I mean, you'd have to be a fool to do such a thing. So we did it. Yeah, we did it. Hi, I'm Giovanni Colantonio. I'm the gaming section lead here at digitaltrends.com, and a few months ago, the gaming team started to ask ourselves a question. What do we think are the best games of all time? Now, this wasn't just an arbitrary thing we were asking ourselves. We wanted to know what we valued in video games. What are the kinds of things that make a game an enduring classic to us? What are the kinds of things that have us coming back to a game over and over and over again? These were questions that we felt would help us better understand how we approach things like game criticism. And honestly, we thought that would help our audience too. If you watch a video review or read a review on our website, we want you to understand our perspective. We want you to know what we value in games so you can compare that to what you think about games and have a better understanding of where we're coming from. So with that in mind, we've spent the last couple of months putting together what we feel are the best video games of all time. And you can go over to digitaltrends.com right now and see a list of our 50 top games, plus a bunch of great honorable mentions as well. But in this video, I'm going to save you a little bit of time. I'm going to go over our top 10 on that list. And if you want to say thank you, you can click the link to the full article in the description and give the whole list a read. Now, before I get into this top 10, I want to talk really quickly about the methodology behind this list. When you go to make a list of the top games of all time, you have to ask yourself what you actually mean by that prompt. Are we talking about the most influential and important games of all time? A list like that is really valuable, but also it tends to favor games that are foundational, older games that kind of laid the groundwork for what would come. Now, on the other side of it, you could also look at this as a list of truly the best games of all time, games that are the culmination of decades of work and developers riffing off one another. But on that end of the spectrum, you also end up with a lot of recent games. I mean, you really wouldn't want to put Super Mario Bros. On the list when you could put Super Mario Odyssey on it, right? So for our list, we wanted to go somewhere in between. We still wanted all these games to feel important and influential, but we also wanted ones that you could go back to in 2023 and really get something out of. And that's hard when a lot of older games don't necessarily hold up super well. So when looking at these games, our focus here wasn't necessarily on the word fun. Obviously, there are some games that are on our list that are just pure fun experiences, but with some of these older games, we were thinking about experiences that were engaging in some way. And let me give you an example of that. The 2016 version of Doom is probably more fun and refined than the 1993 original, but you still get so much out of playing that original version of Doom. You get to see how it laid the groundwork for the modern shooter, and that feels incredible. It's like going back to early cinema and seeing all these camera techniques being born right in front of you. So we just wanted to strike a really healthy balance between that and our list, and I think you'll see that in this top 10. Now, before we get into the top 10, let's do a quick lightning round. This will kind of prepare you to see how outraged you're going to be by the rest of this list. Here are a couple of games that were just off our top 10, but I think are worth shouting out. In 2023, you can't have a list like this without The Last of Us, a game that set the template for what a modern AAA cinematic action-adventure game looks like, and it's still influential today. Just look at the HBO series that is changing the way we're thinking about video game adaptations. Of course, we have to shout out The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, a fantastic open-world game on its own right, but the reason it stands out to us is the community around it and the modding scene that shows that there's always more life in a game once it gets in the hands of really dedicated fans. You may be surprised to learn that Wii Sports is high up on our list, but I challenge you to find a game that you could hand to your 5-year-old niece and your 80-year-old grandmother and have them both understand and have fun playing. It is a fantastic game, and it might be my pick for the best game of all time, though my coworkers would not let that happen. And finally, we do have a Pokemon game on this list, but it's probably not the one you're thinking of. Rather than going with Red and Blue, we actually wanted to go with the game that perfects that formula the best, and for us, we think that's Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the Nintendo DS remakes of Gold and Silver. These are games that really lock the Pokemon formula down, and if you're going to have somebody play one game that represents the series, we think these are the best choices. With those out of the way, let's get to the actual top 10. All right, at number 10, it's a Super Mario 64! Eat your heart out, Chris Pratt. Now look, this was one of these games that actually we had a lot of debate about. There was a lot of conversation about whether or not we should put Super Mario Odyssey in this slot instead, which is the most refined 3D Mario game. But we kept coming back to Super Mario 64, and I think there's a really good reason for that. On the influence side, obviously this is the game that taught us all how to move in 3D space and taught developers how to make games in 3D space. It's kind of patient zero for modern modern 3D games. But beyond that, I think few experiences are as joyful as this, even other Mario games. Every little piece of this is memorable. From the outside of Princess Peach's castle, to ground pounding a chain chomp in the first level, to dropping a penguin off the side of a cliff, something that you really shouldn't do, that's horrible. Even today, few games transport you to another world as well as Super Mario 64 does. Everything about it is just so inviting. You almost want to jump through your TV screen like Mario jumping through a painting. So even if its visuals are a little blocky or its movement a little stiff by today's standards, Super Mario 64 still has a rightful place in our hearts. It's a game that encourages exploration in a joyful manner that reminds us why we love video games all over again. At number 9, it's Half-Life 2. Now, this one probably won't come as much of a surprise to some PC gamers out here. When this game launched, it was a huge, huge deal. Not only did it raise the bar for video game visuals at the time, but it was a truly revolutionary first-person shooter as well. That was for a lot of different reasons. One is the way that it worked puzzling into its gameplay. There were a lot of really, really great physics puzzles in this game that still really hold up to this day. And on top of that, there's so much incredible environmental storytelling that happens in this game. You didn't need to have NPCs filling your ear with lore. You could see so much of the story in the world around you, and that made for a really special experience that a lot of games still haven't quite lived up to in the same way. Now, I think you can see the DNA of this game in a lot of modern shooters, but Half-Life 2 still reigns supreme as a masterclass in atmosphere. If you've never played it before, you should check it out and see for yourself.
Few tales are told of Hades, whose very name inspires fear and penitence.
At number 8, we have what I think is the biggest surprise on this list. It's the indie roguelike Hades. Now, a lot of really great indie games are featured on our top 50, from Disco Elysium to Celeste, but Hades was the one that we all really, really gravitated towards. At first, it felt a little weird to have it in the top 10, considering it's a fairly new game that came out in 2020, but the more we talked about it, the more it felt justified. There's a lot that's incredible about Hades, and the action is obviously a clear standout here. The way that perks and boons combine to make it so that no two runs feel the same is truly extraordinary, and I don't think any other game has done it as well as this. But what we really love about Hades is the fact that it's so good at making you feel like you are never wasting your time, and that is so hard in a roguelike. I mean, that's hard in games in general. Who hasn't played an RPG, died in a half-an-hour boss fight, and thought, what am I doing with my life? With Hades, you never really have that moment. You're always progressing no matter what, even when you die on a run. You're learning more about these characters, you're moving the story forward, you're collecting materials that let you upgrade your underworld base, you're getting new abilities and unlocking weapons. All of those things make it incredibly easy to lose yourself in Hades. I think I've spent over 100 hours in this game, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. If you forced me to pick a desert island game, I honestly think it would be Hades. There's just no bottom to this thing. At number 7, we've got The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Now, this one's interesting. 10 years ago, this would be number 1 on the top of every single best game of all time list. But it's actually been a little more controversial in recent years. There's been a lot of discourse about how this game has held up, with a lot of people mentioning that the Nintendo 64 has not been super kind to it. It may not be the most refined Zelda game mechanically, but to us, it's still one of the most important ones. And that's because it's one of the only video games that kind of feels equivalent to classic canonical literature. Like, you know when you're learning about literature and they make you read the Canterbury Tales or something like that? These really foundational stories that really show you the evolution of writing? That's kind of what Ocarina of Time feels like to us today. It feels like that building brick, both in terms of how developers would learn to make 3D adventure games, but also it's kind of the quintessential hero's journey story within video games. It is a timeless tale in a way that I think a lot of games don't really capture. There's something classical about it. So even if this is a game that maybe doesn't feel totally great to play by today's standards, I still think you can go back to it and have a really strong experience with it. It's the kind of game that should be on a syllabus for any class teaching you about the history of video games. At number 6, it's Minecraft. Now, this one might have some people rolling their eyes, especially if you didn't grow up with this game. But honestly, it's hard to deny the importance of Minecraft. It has been a powerful, powerful educational tool that has almost operated as a modern sandbox for younger players. It encourages creativity through its excellent building mechanics. It almost feels like modern Legos. And I think Minecraft was incredibly ahead of its time too. I mean, look at where it is now. It kind of is a successful metaverse, a digital space that people can really soak into. A lot of people have chased this idea trying to replicate what Minecraft does and failed. I'm looking at you, Mark Zuckerberg. There's a lot of reasons that Minecraft has been able to pull this off. Obviously, the live service support for it over the years has been incredible and something that I think a lot of developers are probably envious of. But beyond all of that, Minecraft is just incredibly fun. Its survival and building mechanics are really easy to get into but have an incredible amount of depth to them. It makes for something that a kid can play very casually, but you can also create some really wild inventions in it that are jaw-dropping. So even if Minecraft isn't for you, I think we can all agree that it deserves a little bit of recognition on this list. And if you think it's too high, let us know in the comments. Okay, we've made it to the top 5, and let's start it off with an easy one. At number 5, we've got Pac-Man. Now, I could sit here and describe what Pac-Man is, but I think we probably all know what it is at this point, and that is thanks to the fact that this is one of the most iconic and easy to communicate games of all time. So instead of going deep into explaining what the maze game really looks like, let me tell you an anecdote instead that really speaks to the power of the game for me. On a recent trip, I found myself in an airport that had this arcade cabinet. It was loaded up with a bunch of Atari games, and Pac-Man was on it. Now, I did have my Nintendo Switch with me and a bunch of modern games that I was itching to play, but I was drawn to that cabinet. I walked over to it, loaded up a game, and immediately got sucked into it. But what was more incredible to me was that while I was playing it, a random little kid ran up and just started watching it behind my back. He was transfixed on it just as much as I was. Now, these are kids who are growing up in the age of Fortnite, games that are much more complex and look prettier, but he still was drawn into Pac-Man. He actually kicked me off the machine to play it himself. I think that speaks to the timelessness of this game. It's so easy to see someone playing it and just understand, hey, that looks like fun and I want to try it. Now, even though this formula was perfected a little bit later with games like Miss Pac-Man, we still feel that Pac-Man is a foundational game that deserves its spot on this list. I kind of want to go play it right now. Okay, so here's an interesting one. At number 4, we settled on The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. That's right, 2 Zelda games in our top 10, and I think that honestly that's very earned. We're 6 years removed from Breath of the Wild's release now, but I think its influence has been very clear. It's easy to see why people really grasped onto this open world design at the time. A lot of games in the genre kind of give you a map that's full of icons, and as you play, you check things off the list until the world becomes barren. Breath of the Wild's kind of the opposite of that. When you start, you have nothing. You have to discover things for yourself. And as you do that, the map actually fills up with icons reminding you of everything that you've done. It becomes a document of your journey in the world, and that's a really smart inversion of the open world formula. However, what really sells this game for me is the fact that 6 years later, I still routinely see videos of this game with people doing things that I never thought was possible in it. I mean, I remember when it first came out and seeing a flying machine for the first time and thinking, wow, that's crazy, people really busted this thing open. But nowadays, that seems like nothing. People are orchestrating wild stunts in the game, having Link flip up in the air on a motorcycle and blow up 3 guardians with a well-placed arrow. Things like that make this game constantly exciting. It feels like we haven't found the end of what's possible in this game, and honestly, that's an incredible feat. Even with something as massive as Elden Ring, I kind of felt like I'd seen everything there was to see after a year of it. With Breath of the Wild, that is not the case, and that makes it a special experience that I just want to go back to over and over again. But note that we're releasing this video right before The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom comes out, so who knows? Maybe this list will change the next time we update it. At number 3, a fitting choice, it's Super Mario Bros. 3. Now, a lot of the things that I said about Super Mario 64 honestly are completely applicable here. Once again, this really shows the power of Nintendo and its ability to create really joyful experiences that encourage the act of play. But Super Mario Bros. 3 feels even more timeless. It's a game that I have come back to at multiple points in my life. As a kid, as a student in college, as an adult, no matter how I play it, on what console I play it on, it is still consistently one of the most fun experiences I have with a video game. Now, that is largely thanks to the fact that it is just an incredibly refined 2D platformer with some of Nintendo's best level design ever. I mean, I bet you could list all of the power-ups or the themes for every world off the top of your head without thinking about it for too long. Now, there are games like The Last of Us that are incredible because they tell really deep stories that make us think about the human condition. But Mario Bros. 3 is kind of the other side of that. This is a game that's pure entertainment, but it's not empty entertainment. It's almost like a fountain of youth. Anytime I go back to it, I'm transported back to my childhood. I'm that kid playing early video games for the first time and thinking that anything is possible, just completely taken by all the sights and sounds. It's so easy to get cynical with these gigantic modern video games that take hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to produce. But there's a simple joy to Super Mario Bros. 3 that seems like it'll never fade.
These next tests require cooperation. Consequently, they have never been solved by a human. That's where you come in. You don't know pride. You don't know fear. You don't know anything. You'll be perfect.
Okay, our runner-up for the best video game of all time, at number 2, it's Portal 2. Now, this one almost surprised me at first, but looking at the data, it actually made a lot of sense. As a peek behind the curtain, we had a council of about 5 people who put together this list, but we didn't want it to just be the opinion of only those people. So we polled a ton of people within Digital Trends, from staff writers to freelancers to people who weren't even necessarily gamers, quote unquote. And what we found was that Portal and Portal 2 ended up on the top of a lot of lists. So it became clear right away that it should be pretty high on ours too. And it's really easy to see why. Both Portal games, but especially Portal 2, almost feel like magic tricks. The act of creating a portal and walking through it and coming out somewhere else is the kind of thing that you can only accomplish in a video game. It's the kind of sharp puzzle game that makes you feel like a genius. Smart portal placement is always going to result in some sort of eureka moment that's just so satisfying to see unfold. Now, on top of all that, there's also the game's humor, which I think has been maybe more important than we give it credit for. It is a hilarious game, and in some ways, I think it kind of built what modern humor looks like on the internet, maybe for better or worse, but in this game, for better. With memorable characters like GLaDOS and Wheatley, a fantastic multiplayer mode, and a perfectly engineered single-player mode that never overstates its welcome, Portal 2 truly is one of the greatest games of all time, and something that we can return to over and over again, which I guess we're gonna need to since Valve doesn't really make games anymore. I'm not saying that we need Portal 3 anytime soon, but, you know, just saying. Okay, it's the moment we've all been waiting for. Digital Trends' pick for the best game of all time is Tetris. Now, there was actually no debate about this one. When we first asked ourselves what we thought the best game of all time was, pretty much everybody agreed on Tetris right away. There was never a question about what was going to be in this top spot, and that speaks to the power of this game. There just isn't a game that's as elegantly designed as Tetris. The Tetramino stacking formula was honestly perfect when it first released, and it's only gotten better over time. I mean, no matter what way you slice this game, it's still good. Look at something like Tetris Effect, which is one of the best VR experiences out there. Or something like Tetris 99, which is a fantastic battle royale game that doesn't seem like it should work, but really, really does. All of this speaks to the elegance of this formula, something that puts you into this zen flow state that just feels incredibly good to play, while still being challenging for those who want to play it at a really high competitive level. And what we love about this most of all is that it's universal. You don't need to speak a certain language or be a certain age to appreciate this game. It feels like something that anybody can easily pick up and enjoy, and that's something that's really unique about video games. Operating at their best, they can feel like a shared experience that breaks all barriers. Anyone can pick this up and have fun, and that's something that we admire in an age where games aren't necessarily always as approachable. There are no complex controls to learn, you don't need to know a certain language to understand its story, it's just Tetris. Plain and simple, Tetris, and it's perfect.